The late afternoon sun cast golden rays across the lake, where Liam and Ethan sat in silence. The calm water mirrored the chaos within them, ripples spreading, stirring emotions neither dared to name. Their parents had married 6 months ago, fusing two families that didn't quite fit. Liam, the elder by 4 years, exuded a magnetic confidence. Ethan, quieter and more withdrawn, often avoided the spotlight Liam thrived in. Yet, in their isolation from the rest of the world, an unspoken connection had begun to take root. Liam broke the silence, his voice smooth but heavy with subtext. "You don't have to keep pretending to like it here, you know. I see it in your face. You hate this place as much as I do." Ethan glanced at him, surprised by the observation. "I don't hate it. I don't feel like I belong." "That makes 2 of us," Liam said, his gaze lingering on Ethan longer than necessary. "We're the outsiders here, you and me." The words struck Ethan with a force he hadn't anticipated. Since the marriage, he'd felt like an interloper in his own home, navigating unfamiliar dynamics and suffocating expectations. But hearing Liam articulate the same feeling sparked a rare sense of kinship. Over the next hour, their conversation deepened. They talked about everything: their shared resentment toward the whirlwind romance that had thrust their parents together, the pressures of fitting into a ready-made family, and the loneliness they both carried. As dusk crept in, Liam reached into his pocket and retrieved a flask, offering Ethan a drink. "Here's to surviving this mess," Liam said, raising it in mock toast. Ethan hesitated before taking a sip. The burn of whiskey was sharp, yet it eased the knot in his chest. The shift in atmosphere was subtle but undeniable. Liam leaned closer, his expression unreadable. "You know," he said quietly, "you're not like anyone I've ever met." Ethan froze, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Liam's eyes locked onto his. "I mean, you're real. You don't try to impress anyone, and you don't play games. It's rare. I like that about you." Heat crept up Ethan's neck, and he looked away, unsure how to respond. But Liam wasn't finished. "I know this sounds crazy, but I feel like I can actually breathe around you. Like I don't have to pretend." The words lingered between them, heavy and charged. Ethan wanted to dismiss them, to laugh it off, but something in Liam's tone made it impossible. For the first time in months, Ethan felt seen, not as a stepbrother or a stranger, but as himself. Night fell, and as the stars began to scatter across the sky, Liam reached out, his hand brushing against Ethan's. The contact was electric, igniting something neither of them fully understood but couldn't deny. "Liam," Ethan began, his voice trembling. "Don't say anything," Liam murmured, his voice low, almost pleading. "Just stay here with me. Just for a little while." Ethan stayed. Ethan paced the dimly lit hallway of his apartment, his mind a storm of contradictions. The guilt had become unbearable, a constant weight pressing on his chest. Every time Sarah smiled at him, her eyes brimming with trust, he felt himself sinking deeper into his lies. She was good to him, better than he deserved. But even her warmth couldn't erase the memory of Liam's touch, the pull of something forbidden and unrelenting. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her soft voice breaking his thoughts. "Ethan, are you okay?" He turned quickly, masking his unease with a smile. "Yeah. Just thinking about work." She approached him, placing a hand on his arm. "You've been so distracted lately. I'm worried about you." He opened his mouth to respond, but the buzz of his phone on the counter stole his attention. Ethan's heart sank as he saw Liam's name flash across the screen. "Is that your boss again?" Sarah asked, tilting her head in concern. Ethan nodded too quickly. "Yeah. It's nothing important." He silenced the call, but his pulse was pounding. Liam had been relentless these past few weeks. Texts, calls, sudden visits that always left Ethan on edge. Despite Ethan's attempts to create distance, Liam refused to let go. Later that evening, Ethan found himself alone in his car, parked outside Liam's loft. He'd told Sarah he was meeting a friend for drinks, but in truth, he'd been summoned. Liam's messages had grown darker, more desperate. "You can't just ignore me," one text read. "We need to talk." The door to the loft opened before Ethan could knock. Liam stood in the doorway, his expression a volatile mix of relief and anger. "You're finally here," Liam said, stepping aside to let him in. The loft was dimly lit, the air heavy with tension. Ethan stayed near the door, his arms crossed defensively. "What do you want, Liam?" Liam moved closer, his eyes burning with intensity. "You." "That's what I've always wanted." Ethan exhaled sharply. "We can't keep doing this. It's wrong." "Sarah." "Sarah doesn't know you like I do," Liam interrupted, his voice rising. "She doesn't see the real you." Ethan shook his head, his voice strained. "You don't understand. I'm trying to move on. You should too." But Liam wasn't listening. He stepped closer, his tone turning desperate. "Move on? How can I, when you're the only thing that makes sense in my life?" Ethan turned away, but Liam grabbed his wrist, pulling him back. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of their breathing. "I won't let you go," Liam said, his voice low but firm. The words sent a chill through Ethan, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he stood frozen, trapped between his guilt and the inescapable pull of their connection. Unseen by both, Liam's phone screen lit up on the counter, a picture of Sarah smiling, her contact name displayed beneath it. A small message glowed on the screen. "Miss you. Can't wait to see you tomorrow." Ethan's chest tightened as he caught sight of it, the implications sinking in. The tension between them had reached its breaking point, but the real fracture was yet to come. The rain hammered against the window as Ethan stared blankly at the coffee table, his thoughts spiraling. Sarah had left hours ago, oblivious to the turmoil raging within him. Across the room, Liam sat on the couch, his eyes fixed on Ethan with an unsettling intensity. "You can't keep pretending this isn't what you want," Liam said, his voice calm but laced with something dangerous. Ethan shook his head, his voice trembling. "It doesn't matter what I want. This has to stop. You have to stop." Liam's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "You think you can just walk away from me? After everything we've been through?" Ethan stood abruptly, his hands clenching into fists. "It was a mistake, Liam. All of it. And I'm done." The words hung in the air like a sharp blade, cutting through whatever thread still connected them. For a moment, Liam said nothing, his gaze dropping to the floor. Then, without warning, he stood and walked toward Ethan, his movements deliberate and slow. "You think you can erase me? Erase us?" Liam's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Ethan's stomach turn. "You're mine, Ethan. You always have been." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of keys jangling outside the door froze them both. The door opened, and Sarah stepped in, her cheerful smile fading as she saw the tension in the room. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked, glancing between them. Ethan stepped forward, his voice rushed. "No, Liam was just leaving." But Liam didn't move. Instead, he turned to Sarah, his expression softening into something almost kind. "We were just having a little heart-to-heart." Sarah gave a hesitant smile, clearly sensing the unease. "Well, I'm glad you two are talking. It's important, you know? Family and all." Ethan's heart sank at her words. She had no idea what she'd walked into, or what Liam was capable of. The storm outside intensified as the night dragged on. Sarah had gone to bed, leaving Ethan and Liam alone again. The silence between them was suffocating, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to leave. Now." Liam stepped closer, his face a mask of anguish and fury. "You don't mean that. You're just scared. But you'll see, I'm the only one who really knows you." Ethan's patience snapped. "Stay away from me. Stay away from her." Liam's expression twisted into something unrecognizable. "If I can't have you, then no one will." The words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Before he could react, Liam turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The next morning, Sarah's lifeless body was found in the living room, her throat bruised from Liam's hands. Ethan collapsed beside her, sobbing uncontrollably as reality shattered around him. Detective Harris would later piece together the clues, But Ethan's life was already in ruins. Liam was gone, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a single note for Ethan: "You'll always belong to me." In the end, Ethan was left with nothing but guilt and the haunting knowledge that, despite everything, part of him still longed for the man who had destroyed his world. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, the dim light of the early morning casting long shadows across the room. His hands trembled as he held Sarah's engagement ring, the small diamond catching the faint glow. It was the only thing left of her, something beautiful now tainted by tragedy. The police had left hours ago, taking Sarah's body and leaving Ethan in a void of grief and guilt. Detective Harris had lingered, his sharp eyes scanning the apartment as if searching for something unspoken. Ethan had avoided his questions, too consumed by the weight of what had happened to offer anything but silence. He stared at the ring, his thoughts spiraling back to the moment he found her. The image of her lifeless body burned into his mind, her trusting smile replaced with an expression of horror. He could still feel the faint warmth of her skin as he'd held her, begging her to wake up, knowing deep down that she never would. The sharp knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. His stomach tightened as he approached, half expecting Liam to be on the other side. Instead, Detective Harris stood there, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Hayes, I need to ask you a few more questions," Harris said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Ethan nodded numbly, motioning for him to sit. The detective didn't. Instead, he walked slowly around the room, his gaze lingering on small details: an overturned photo frame, a whiskey glass on the counter, the faint smell of cologne that didn't belong to Ethan. "I know this is difficult," Harris began, his voice measured, "but we're trying to piece together what happened last night. You said Sarah went to bed early, correct?" Ethan nodded again, his voice barely audible. "Yes. She was tired. And Liam, when did he leave?" The name hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. His throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Harris turned to face him, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Ethan, I know Liam was here. Neighbors saw him enter, but no one saw him leave." Ethan's chest tightened as panic set in. I don't know where he went," he stammered. Harris studied him for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded note sealed in a clear evidence bag. He held it up. "This was in Sarah's hand," Harris said. "Do you recognize the handwriting?" Ethan's heart dropped as he saw the note. It was always supposed to be just us. Tears filled his eyes, his breath hitching as Harris leaned closer. "If you're protecting him, now is the time to tell me. Otherwise, this only ends one way." Ethan shook his head violently, but the truth clawed at his insides. He could feel Liam's presence everywhere, a phantom that refused to let him go. As Harris left, the air in the room grew heavier. Ethan knew Liam was out there, watching, waiting. And no matter how far he tried to run, the shadow of their bond would always find him.